Okay, part 2. Haas and the Grey Priests. Now then, I began, please to ensure that the rooms and food are prepared. Since we were traveling by air, our journey to Haas had been a short one. I landed my high beast by the monastery, at which point all of my attendants and personnel alighted except Fran. When their luggage had been taken out and moved into the monastery, I departed for the winter mansion. When we were high in the sky above the mansion, I furrowed my brow. What? There's nobody there. Did I get the date wrong or something? No, Ferdinand would have known if you gotten the date wrong. He would have told you and called you a fool for not having the date right. So, no? Maybe you scared them or something? Or maybe they're scared to come out. Who knows? The year before, while the people were waiting for us to arrive, a bustling crowd was preparing the large field-like plaza for the festival. But this year, there was no signs of any people nor any preparations being made. I had sent a letter ahead of time outlining the date of my visit, but perhaps I had written it down incorrectly or simply just misread something. Bridget, who was flying ahead of me on her high beast, pointed down toward the ground and began to ascend. I could see several people kneeling by the front door of the winter mansion, and when I strained my eyes, I recognized them as Richt and the town chiefs. High Bishop, Richt said, thank you for coming. While I received my greetings, Fran, Achim, and Egan began taking more luggage-filled boxes out of my panda bus. When you combine their living necessities, learning materials, and recreational time, there was a surprising amount to unload. Once they were done, I put away my high beast. Richt, why aren't you preparing for the Harvest Festival? We are naturally refraining from holding such large-scale festivities while out of the Archduke's favor. This year we hope to perform only the ritual and pay our taxes. Richt went on to explain that it was difficult for them to hold the festival as they usually would with the eyes of their neighbors and traveling merchants on them. But they still needed to hold the baptism, coming of age, and wedding ceremonies, which they hoped to do quietly in the gathering hall of the winter mansion. I started feeling a little nervous. The people here had endured a harsh year without the blessing. They were unable to hold the once-a-year celebration that everyone loved, and now here I was sending 2 Grey Priests to keep an eye on them. Would Achim and Ekin really be safe here with everyone so unhappy? I glanced over at the 2 Grey Priests, at which point Fran stepped forward to introduce them. These are the Grey Priests who shall be staying here and representing the High Bishop during this winter. Their names are Achim and Egan. Whatever. With that, Achim and Egan crossed their arms in front of their chest and crouched a little. Fran and the others tensed up at the sight. These men may have been Grey Priests, but they were my representatives and soon to be their teachers. Haas's very future was resting in their hands, so I could imagine that Richt was nervous to see what they were like as people. Richt, please guide us to their rooms. As you can see, they have much luggage with them, and I would like to see the conditions in which they will be staying. As you wish. Please follow me. One of the town chiefs hurried off on Richt's instructions to send word of our arrival. Richt then led us into the mansion, heading toward the room where Achim and Egan would be staying. Fran and the 2 priests were carrying boxes behind me, followed closely by Justice and my 2 guard knights. The fear of playing children could be heard at first, but this quickly quieted down as we walked. It's quiet now, but I can feel eyes all over me. We climbed a creaky staircase in the living area. Several curious children poked their heads out from around corners or behind cracked open doors. While I smiled whenever I made eye contact with them, they always gasped or ran away to hide. It seemed like they considered me quite scary. It's good to think of nobles as scary. I mean, they're not wrong here. But it kind of seems like the boys are trying to show how brave they are by sneaking glances at me. That's a bit worrying. And I mean, she's supposed to be seen as a saint. I assume that even still, they're still scared. Some doors were open wide enough for me to see inside the rooms beyond them. They were of various different sizes, with each one housing an entire family. Some were classroom-sized, with a dozen people sleeping on straw mattresses strewn about the floor, while others were small with an actual bed inside. They largely resembled my lower city home, that is, before I started cleaning it from top to bottom. This is where they will be staying. It is the closest room to my office here. Here they'll be able to minimize contact with the others if they so wish. Richt had stopped in front of a 2-person room. Considering it had 2 separate beds, I could guess that he had reserved an especially high-quality room for them. Fran, Achim, and Egan set their boxes down, then collectively grimaced as they examined the interior. My apologies, but could you tell us where the well and cleaning utensils are so that we might clean the room? Fran asked. It was probably unbearably filthy for them, raised in the always immaculate temple and orphanage. I could definitely sympathize with them. After all, back in the lower city, the first thing I had done when I got to my feet was clean. One of the town chiefs blinked in surprise, then hurried off to ask a woman where the cleaning utensils were. I let out a quiet sigh. Egan, if you wish to clean the room to make it as comfortable as possible for the both of you, that is perfectly fine. But please take care not to force the temple's lifestyle on everyone else. This is not the temple. Understood. Alchem, Egan, and Fran all opened their mouths as if about to protest, but promptly conceded after seeing the cleaning utensils the town chief returned with. Perhaps it would be best to give them some support here. Alchem, Egan, might I suggest taking a set of cleaning utensils from the monastery tomorrow? If there's anything else you need, you may ask Fran. Your concern honors us, Lady Rosemine. They both resolved to enjoy the room as it was for the night, then give it a thorough clean in the morning the next day. It was pretty funny seeing them seriously discuss whether or not they would also need a wash tub for cleaning themselves, considering this place probably didn't even have tools for cleaning clothes. Rick, is everything ready for the ceremony? Yes, Lady Rosemine, please follow us to the dining hall. The Winter Mansion dining hall had a much lower ceiling than the castle's grand hall, and the floor was covered in stains and oily substances. Ooh. Likely due to feasts having been held there. A strange smell wafted through the air as well. That said, no matter how bad this is, they probably made a real attempt to clean it as much as they could. The festival is always held outside, so they almost certainly hadn't expected priests and tax officials to be entering the Winter Mansion itself. I could bear it, but Eckert had a very stern look on his face. There was a stage prepared in the hall, and just like last year, I stood at the altar with Justice, Fran, and my 2 guard knights. Aside from us being inside, nothing seemed to have really changed. I summoned the children who were to be baptized onto the stage, blessing them after reading aloud the picture books about the gods. The coming of age and wedding ceremonies were also pretty similar to the year prior, but everyone looked sick rather than celebrating, and there was a heavy air of sorrow weighing down the whole room. Once the ceremonies were over, I called Alchem and Egan up onto the stage to introduce them. People of Haas, despite the difficulties you have endured this year, having had to farm without a blessing, you have worked well. The Archduke has entrusted that 2 great priests be sent to your Winter Mansion to ensure that no embers of rebellion still linger. Their names are Alchem and Egan. They are here to watch over you, but also to teach you. A stir ran through the crowd at the word teach. Recent letters from Haas were found to contain language that is highly disrespectful. Were another noble to receive such letters, their anger would be palpable. Such a mistake was born simply due to the failure of your previous mayor and your inexperience with nobles. Once again, Haas was on the verge of making a grave mistake. Some people were shocked to hear that they were angering nobles once again. Others let out angry cries about the mayor failing to do his job right. I held up a hand to silence them. You will not be punished for those affronts. Instead, I have instructed these 2 grey priests, both highly familiar with how to communicate with nobles, to use this opportunity to teach your mayor and his workers the proper language to use when communicating with nobles. If they study well and remember these lessons, I am sure there will be no more incidents such as this. The people's anger faded once they understood that not only were they not going to be punished, but they were being offered an opportunity to learn from their mistake. It was important to use this moment of relief to put my foot down. The Grey Priests are orphans, but understand that they are directly representing me, the High Bishop. If they are at any point treated poorly, they will move to the monastery. I trust that you will not be so foolish as to abuse them as your punishment is coming to an end. But regardless, take care to be respectful when speaking to them. At this remark, the people gathered in the hall all wore dark expressions, visible even from up on stage. It was obvious that they expected their punishment to never end. While they did work hard for an entire year without a blessing, I think they deserve at least a little relief. I pursed my lips in thought, then walked from the center of the stage to the edge where Eckert and the others were standing in wait. Eckert, Justice? Yes, Lady Rosemine? Might we permit them to play a little wharf? I believe too much restraint is bad for the heart. Eckert grimaced at my suggestion, clearly thinking about how furious Ferdinand would get if we deviated from the plan, but Justice actually smiled in amusement. It is important to take breathers, my lady, and the people will surely be moved if they are told you permitted it yourself, he said. I personally consider it a fine idea, though normal nobles will never take into account the feelings of mere commoners. With Justice in my corner, I took Alchem and Egan over to where Richt was. Richt, I appreciate your rationale for not holding the festival, but would tensions not explode during the winter if the people don't relieve any of their stresses? I asked quietly. His eyes wavered for a moment, then he gave a nod. You may be right. You and I shall speak in the meeting room, and should something take place outside while we are in there, I am certain that I will not notice it. No matter how bad the people might get, There is surely nothing wrong with doing something that goes unnoticed, don't you agree? Rick didn't seem to grasp my implication. I looked toward Occam. It seems that it is already time for you to work. Would you mind explaining to Rick what I meant? Occam blinked in surprise, muttering, "Did he truly not understand that?" quietly under his breath. Egan appeared to be just as surprised. His eyes were now open wide in disbelief. I imagine he did understand in some regard, but the people of Haas have suffered so much as a result of misunderstanding that they have most likely lost all confidence in their ability to interpret things. I see. Mayor Richt, Lady Rosemine is saying that she will turn a blind eye to any festivities that might take place outside while you and she are discussing matters in the meeting room, Occam explained. You may interpret that as her giving you permission to play Worf, Egan added. Egan, talk. With that, Richt broke into a smile. Understood. We have many hot-blooded youths in Haas, and I'm sure that they will be overjoyed to hear this. Rick left, setting up the Worf tournament to one of the town chiefs, and exited the dining hall, guiding me and the others to the meeting room. We heard shouts ring out not long after we were gone. The High Bishop gave us her approval. Let's go play some Worf. Yeah, woohoo! The townsfolk let out loud, fervent cries as though all the frustration that had been building up inside of them over the year was unleashing all at once. Occam and Egan flinched and turned around fearfully, looking at the doors to the hall. They must have been genuinely frightened, given that they had never heard people roar so loudly that the vibrations could quite literally be felt through the floor. I could only hope that my gesture of goodwill would help make their time here as peaceful as possible. In the meeting room, we discussed this year's harvest, taxes, and the tithe that we paid to me. Haas's lack of a blessing meant that its harvest was smaller than those of the neighboring cities, but its yield was large enough to prove that the townsfolk really had poured their all into their work. Just like last year, Justice would be sending the taxes to the castle the next morning, with the portion of my tithe being used to pay for Occam and Egan's winter preparations. The rest would be brought to the monastery rather than the castle to help fund its winter preparations. As our meeting continued, the Worf tournament outside concluded. Energetic voices conveyed a lively atmosphere as they all came back into the hall, their bright tones radiating the fun they had just had, which confirmed to me that permitting the tournament to happen had been the right move. After the meeting was dinner in the dining hall. I already knew from my time in Ilgner that the Grey Priest would be stunned into silence by how commoners ate. So I instructed Occam and Egan to eat with me so that I could instruct them on what to do. The commoners lined up the food atop low tables that was nothing more than long boards placed over 2 large boxes. Then sat down on straw and started eating whatever they wanted to. Aside from the knives placed by the meat so that people could help themselves, wooden spoons were the only cutlery available. Everyone ate with their hands when they weren't having soup-like foods. As expected, the whole experience was so unfamiliar to Occam and Egan that they froze in place out of shock. They were supposed to be serving Eckert and Justice, but instead they were just standing stock still, their mouths agape. Eckert wasn't scolding them because he too was taken aback by the scene. He had apparently never seen commoners eat up close, so he was always on the stage far away from the plaza, and food was only served when the sun started to set. His stern expression reminded me of when Ferdinand had first watched Haas's orphans eat. If their behavior displeases you, I would recommend looking away, I commented. This is normal to them. They may be able to look away, but they cannot block out the noise, Fran replied, regretfully shaking his head as he served my food. He was largely unfazed, and he had seen this often enough with Nora's group and when accompanying me to Ilgner. Lady Rosamund, when will we be eating? Occam and Egan asked together, both looking nervous. Tables and chairs had been provided for the nobles in our group, but it must have been assumed that the Grey Priest wouldn't mind eating with the commoners. You may eat with us here for today. I imagine it will take some time for you to adjust to the customs here, so I will ask Rick to prepare a table and chairs in your room, so that you may have your food there instead. That should allow you to eat in peace. We thank you, Lady Rosamund, Occam and Egan replied, patting their chests with relieved sighs. My efforts were, of course, all for the sake of Operation Grimm, but it seemed that sending Grey Priests to winter mansions all over was going to be harder than I expected. Having them adjust to the lifestyle of the commoners after spending their entire lives in the temple was not looking to be a smooth process at all. Well, of course not. I finished my notably modest meal, having not touched most of the food so that Occam and Egan would have enough to eat. By that time, the beer had already started going, giving the townsfolk rather loose tongues. They started to grumble and complain about things, either because they were emboldened by the alcohol or because they had forgotten I was up here on stage. You know, I saw them orphans that got sold to the monastery the other day. Sure looks like they're eating a lot better than us over here, one man said. They're looking real good, not to mention all weighty now. Where'd their scrawny sacks of bones go? I'm so jealous, the woman chimed in with a wistful sigh. If someone told me they'd have that much food in the orphanage, I would have wanted to go there myself. Fran gave a frustrated frown upon hearing all that, but I excitedly clasped my hands together in front of my chest, my eyes shining with excitement. We had sent 4 people to Haas, but we still needed a lot of manpower for our printing endeavors. And thankfully, our wallets were overflowing due to how well the books for nobles had sold. I didn't want to force anyone to work at the orphanage due to the discrimination they would face, but if they actively wanted to live there themselves, then by all means. You might want to talk to Ferdinand about that first. I called out from the stage in hopes of recruiting at least a few people. If you wish to come to the orphanage, please do. We at the monastery would welcome you. The truth is, we have more printing presses now, and we are in need of extra assistance. Everyone chatting at the nearby table let out goofy-sounding noises in shock. Nobody had expected a response from the High Bishop herself. The drunkenness was wiped from their faces in an instant, and although they were starting to look increasingly sick, I continued doing everything I could to drill the virtues, to shill the virtues of the orphanage. Those in the orphanage are given 3 meals a day, as well as beds, clothes, and the like. They are also educated quite thoroughly, so if you will learn to speak properly and act with grace. Young children will go on to serve nobles only a few years after being baptized, and believe it or not, the literacy rate of children raised in the orphanage is 100%. They can all write and do simple math, plus we have picture books, cards, and playing cards all prepared as educational materials to help speed up the learning process. My description so far made the orphanage come across as a bona fide paradise, but there were no denying that there was also some drawbacks, and I wasn't about to hide them. I wanted people to join fully aware of all the pros and cons. There are, of course, some negatives as well. Once you join the orphanage, the world will scorn you as an orphan forevermore. Priests and shrine maidens must also live at the behest of nobles, paying heed to their every word and deed. It is an entirely different environment from a farming town, and the orphans from Haas who joined previously are still struggling to adapt to its culture. High Bishop, the townsfolk were looking conflicted. It must have been something that I had forgotten to mention. Let's see. Oh yes, those raised in the temple orphanage are given no land upon coming of age, are not permitted to marry, and do not receive a break on Earth Day since they must live every day for the sake of the nobility. It's not uncommon to be abruptly sold to a noble you have never met before either, and the orphans themselves have no say in their matters. The more I spoke, the more their expressions turned fearful. I currently serve as the orphanage director and ensure that everyone receives enough food to have their fill. But living conditions were quite abhorrent before I took up the position, and there's no guarantee that they will not revert back to being abhorrent under my successor. Almost nobody wishes to join the orphanage due to its nightmarish reputation and the future being so uncertain. But if anybody wishes to join us there, I welcome you from the bottom of my heart. I don't think anybody's going to join, Rosemine. I excitedly spread out my arms, waiting for people to step forward, and yeah, I knew how it wasn't going to happen. Despite how honorably transparent I had been with my explanation, enthusiasm to join was quite frankly non-existent. I knew it. Well, I already got land in Haas, so, one man mumbled. Yeah, I'm going to get married next year, so I can't just go break her heart like that at another. Right. When everything's said and done, what's more important is living on the land, I could understand them not wanting to have to leave Haas after having lived there in their entire lives. I myself had never intended to leave the lower city. There was some things you just didn't want to give up, no matter how poor or hungry you were. I can fully understand not wanting to leave your hometown. It's unfortunate that you will not be joining the orphanage, but I can see your reasoning. As I sat back down in disappointment, everyone else exchanged blatantly relieved glances, picked their mugs back up, and returned to their food. The sight of commoners eating made the nobles with us grimace, but to me it was a reminder of how my life used to be in the lower city. I really want to see Dad right now. I gripped my sleeves tightly. I only needed to go to the monastery to see him, so when the meal was over, I went over to Rick to announce my departure. Rick, I shall be leaving for the monastery soon. Thank you for visiting today. Everyone had a wonderful time because of you permitting the wharf tournament, he said. There was a relieved smile on his face, which was understandable since it was his job to keep the winter mansion in check. I was also glad to see everybody's mood brighten. Oh, incidentally, Occam and Egan will need a table and some chairs in their room so that they can do written work. Please make arrangements for that. Understood. Also, much like how the people of Haas do not know the ways of nobles, the great priests have lived their lives in the temples and do not understand the ways of the outside world. They eat, clean, and live entirely differently from how you do. Please be considerate of that fact. With my departure announced, Eckert knelt in front of me so that as though I were his mistress. I will be trusting Bridget to guard you, Lady Rosamond. Justice and I will remain here, as is customary, so please return tomorrow morning for the tithe. And so I left Eckert and Justice in the winter mansion, returning to the monastery with Fran and Bridget. Even there, people were having a loud and hearty meal. I headed to my room, listening to the joyous clamor in the dining hall, while Fran went to eat, entrusting Monica and Nicola to serve me while he was away. It seemed that he had gotten without food at the winter mansion so that he could have dinner here instead. Probably better food, too. I grabbed a notepad made with white paper and a pen from my room, then went to the dining hall myself, having Monica pull a chair up to the table where the soldiers were enjoying their food. Gunter, I am currently collecting stories to make into books. Might I ask what stories you have heard in the lower city? Mom had told me a lot of stories, but Dad hadn't really told me many at all. Stories, My mother did tell me a few when I was young, Dad said. He fell into thought for a short while before eventually raising his head. There once was a family, the siblings of which were closer than you would ever believe. Oh, here we go. He's either changing the story he was told, or this is just a story he's making up in his head as he goes. Their names were Tuli, Mine, and Camille. Thus began a story wherein Camille and Tuli raced into a forest to save their beloved sister Mine, who had been kidnapped by Phoebes. And so, Mine was safely returned to her family, and she lived happily ever after with her siblings. What a wonderful story, I said, so moved that my nose was dripping and my eyes brimming with tears. I wrote it all down, and immediately the other soldiers began fighting to tell me the stories they knew. They were all completely new to me and very easy to understand, given that they weren't filled with euphemisms like noble stories were. I could visualize everything instantly. By the time I had written down these stories, 3 stories in total, 7th bell started to ring. I stood up, overcome with a deep sense of satisfaction. Sleep well, everyone. Sleep well, High Bishop. May you be blessed with good dreams. That night I did have a dream. It was a very happy one in which I returned to my lower city home as mine and spent the day laughing with my family. Oh, you're going to wake up and be sad. Oh boy, Hurrell Gathering, take 2. Yeah, here's hoping there's no take 3. Because with Ferdinand around, I think you should be fine. As pleasant as the dream was, I felt an indescribable loneliness upon waking up. I knew it. Yeah, that sucks. After eating breakfast, I left cleaning the monastery to Haas's apprentices and the shrine maidens while having Fran and the adult priests stock Leslie with the cleaning utensils, tubs, soaps, and such that Occam and Egan needed. At the same time, my other attendants and personnel loaded their things into carriages, which we then sent on their way, just like last year. They will be meeting up at the carriages containing Eckert's and Justice's attendants and Haas's winter mansion before we head to the next one. The Plant and Company carriages held the young orphans being moved from Haas to the temple. I saw off the guards after giving them their little bit bonuses, and with that, the brief amount of time I could spend with Dad came to a close. Once they were gone, we departed for the winter mansion on my panda bus. Occam, Egan, will this be enough, I wonder? Please do visit the monastery if you need anything else. Thank you, Lady Rosamond. Now we should be able to clean exceedingly well, the 2 great priests rejoiced, giving long, big appreciative nods as they accepted the supplies from us. It seemed they were going to pour their hearts into cleaning their room, and that was fine by me. In all honesty, it would have been nice if the people of Haas saw them work and put a little more effort into cleaning themselves. Richt, as discussed yesterday, here's food for the both of them. Please consider it part of their winter preparation. Understood. I gave a portion of the tithe to Richt for Occam and Egan, then had the rest piled into Leslie. This would be used for the monastery's winter preparation. Now then, I will see you both when you arrive at the monastery, I said to Eckert and Justice. The former carefully observing as the latter teleported the collected taxes to the castle, and with that I promptly brought all the luggage to Haas's monastery. Whoa, this is a lot of work to be doing first thing in the morning. All I needed to do now was drive Leslie, but that was tiring enough in itself. I decided to sit in my room in the monastery for the time being and sip tea with Bridget, taking a much-needed rest. I was a bit worried about Haas's winter preparations, but Nora and the others knew what needs to be done, and since this is going to be the 3rd time, those from the temple are doing winter preparation, they have grown used to it as well. Things are proceeding smoothly, Fran reported. I gave a nod in response. The Grey Priests in the monastery were running around busily carrying the tithes to the food storage area and hurriedly preserving the perishables. They wouldn't be able to speak freely with me about, so it was best for me to stay in my room. So, Fran, may I read a book while we wait for Justice and my brother to arrive? My apologies. The books you prepared are in one of the carriages that has already left. No way! The copies from the castle's book room and the 9 stories I intended to put in my next book had already departed. Who could have ever seen this coming? I could! I lied. I didn't see it coming, but I had a feeling that could happen. As I wailed, Fran held a picture book Bible. The books she prepared for leisure reading were too bulky to be held during an entire ceremony, he said with a serious expression. If you are fine with the picture books read to the children during their baptism ceremony, then here you are. Yay, thank you ever so much, Fran. I eagerly flipped through the pages, my eyes racing over the letters. That alone was enough to bring much peace to my heart. Just sitting down with a book helped steady my breath, and a warm feeling washed over me like I was finally alive again. I honestly wanted the whole world to understand what an essential part of life reading was. Eckert had just arrived at the monastery while I was blissfully spending my time reading books. What in the world inspired you to make these books, milady? Justice asked, peering over my shoulder at the picture Bible. I understood his words, but not the meaning behind them. I make books to read books. What other reason could I possibly have? Rather, why picture books in particular, he asked. But I couldn't exactly tell him. It was because all the stories I knew both from my Irano days and the ones Mom had told me as a commoner didn't match the aesthetic sense of my target demographic. Because I had never read anything but the Bible, I felt that one must read new books to make new books, so if you ever intend to gift me any, I would gladly accept them all. Justice being Riarda's son was an arch noble, and there was no doubt in my mind that an information-loving man such as him had a huge collection of interesting books. But when I looked up at him with hope-filled eyes, he returned a stern expression much like one his mother would give. "Milady, you should never say something like that in public. You will only draw ambitious nobles to you." I would happily accept bribes from anyone if doing so meant getting more books, but I guess Ferdinand would get mad at me for that. Yes, he would. I can already imagine him smacking me on the head with that Harrison the moment I leaped onto my pile of illicitly gained reading material. Oh dear. After finishing a lunch consisting of soup made by the Grey Shrine Maidens and bread baked by Hugo, we set out by high beast toward the next winter mansion. Unlike Haas, the other cities in the central district had reaped bountiful harvests thanks to having received my blessing, so all the people welcomed us with such fanatical enthusiasm that it actually threw me off. The mayors and town chiefs clasped their hands together and all but begged me to bless their land again next year. It was all I could do to put on a polite smile and say that I would continue to perform spring prayer while serving as the high bishop. This experience looped over and over again. The energy of the festival was overwhelming me to the point that I collapsed. I forced myself up again by drinking potions, but this happened several more times over the course of our journey. In the end, we arrived at Dorvan's winter mansion where we will be meeting up with Ferdinand the day before the night of Shutsaria. Given that we were initially scheduled to arrive with plenty of time to spare, it was safe to say that we had just barely made it. Eckert had apparently sent an ordinance to Ferdinand informing him of our situation. Yeah! I can have that tomorrow for lunch! And since Ferdinand arrived at Dorvan before us, he performed the harvest festival in my stead. The buzz from the celebrations had already died down, and it seemed my peaceful days had returned. "You are late, Rosemine. I was getting exceedingly worried that you were not going to make it at all. My apologies for worrying you, Ferdinand, and thank you ever so much for performing the harvest festival here ahead of time. I am truly, truly grateful that it is over. We had also started to fear that we wouldn't make it to Dorvan in time for the night of Caesarea." I sighed in relief that these worries had gone unfounded, only for Ferdinand to peer down at me with a frown, touching my cheeks and neck with his hands. "So cold." "No, your body temperature is much too high. Your pulse is abnormally rapid, too. Fran, do you have enough potions?" "We have used about half of what we had prepared before our initial departure," he responded instantly. Ferdinand glanced over at a box in the middle of the room. "I am storing extra potions in there. Take what you need for the rest of the trip. Rosemine, drink one, and then the rest of the remainder for tonight. A rest for the remainder of the night. Your gathering will take place tomorrow." While Ferdinand ordered me to leave, Fran began stocking up on potions with visible relief. I trudged over to the room that had been prepared for me, had Monica and Nicola change my clothes, then drank the potion that Fran had given me and went to sleep. I couldn't be responsible for this year's gathering being cancelled when Karlstad was coming all the way from Ehrenfest just to help out. I promised Lutz that I would make it this year too. I need to succeed no matter what. I woke up the next morning feeling much better. Eckert had reunited with Ferdinand, which meant Daniel was serving me again. He seemed a little more dead-eyed and all around exhausted since the last time we were together, but his face lit up with relief when he saw me. I smiled and finished breakfast, all the while imagining what insane workload Ferdinand must have dumped on him. "Rosemine, you are going to be napping this evening, and I imagine you will sleep better if you use your head in the morning." Ferdinand said. Come to my room. You can write reports for the Harvest Festival. I thought I might be able to use my poor health as an excuse to spend all day lounging around in bed with a book, but Ferdinand wanted me to do paperwork with him almost immediately after waking up. How is that any different from a normal day in the temple? I see that grimace on your face, but this is for your own sake, he continued. The sooner these reports are finished, the sooner we can start making your Jarif. We cannot simply begin the moment we have all the ingredients. We must first report the results of the Harvest Festival to the Archduke. Ferdinand was assigned as my doctor and apothecary, so with him pushing me like this, there wasn't much I could do. I simply had to give in and work hard for the sake of my health. I'm going to power through and finish this Jarif so I can finally be healthy. Hopefully you will be healthy by the end of that. Then I'll read books until I collapse from exhaustion. Just you wait. I reluctantly made my way to Ferdinand's room, almost having to fight against the alluring pull of the box with books in it. When we arrived, I found that all the attendants he brought with him for the Harvest Festival were doing work as well, Eckert included. Writing up reports in their respective rooms. That was Ferdinand for you, the man who lived to work and had let no time go to waste. And once again, he was wrapping everyone around him into his obsession. I spent some time silently scratching out documents while an ordnance suddenly flew in, its ivory wings flapping majestically. It circled around the room once before landing on Ferdinand's desk and delivering a message in Karstad's voice. I'm almost there. Have lunch ready. Go play somewhere else! Oh my god. Understood, Ferdinand replied, and once the ordnance had flown away, he looked out the window and sighed. I followed his gaze to see what he was looking at. It was far away enough that it was little more than a speck, but I could make out the griffin representing the Knight Commander flying this way. To say Karstad was almost here was a bit of an understatement. That is enough work for today. Clean up and prepare to welcome him, Ferdinand said. Everyone put away their work at once. Ferdinand's attendants headed to the front entrance to welcome Karstad, while my attendants started preparing tea and sweets. They were hurrying about without a shred of dignity or grace to their movements, but their organization nonetheless showed us how skilled they were. By the time Karstad was brought inside, all the preparations were complete. You appear to be doing well, Rosemine, Karstad greeted me. It's all thanks to Ferdinand's potions, I replied, and it seemed my message was conveyed without me having to spell out that I had been a total mess the day before. Karstad's eyes wavered as he searched for the right words. I'm just glad you have recovered enough for your gathering, he eventually managed to force out. How are matters at the castle? Ferdinand asked casually, taking a seat. Karstad would ordinarily reply that everything was normal and peaceful, but this time he paused to think. Then he carefully scanned the room. There's something I was told to tell you both, Rosemine. You stay seated there. Clear the room of everyone but the guard knights. Once all the attendants were out of the room, Karstad took out this kind of sound-blocking magic tool that affected an entire area. Then activated it.
Come on.
I gotta be at work at 7:45 in the morning.
What's the spot on your computer?
My mouse.
Oh, your mouse. Is what time?
7:45.
Oh, okay.
Gotta be at work at 7:45 to 2 tomorrow.
Okay.
So I'm gonna have to get up a little earlier so I can make sure I get a dang shower before I get the kids ready for
Yeah,
school.
what time did you say? I mean, what day did you say is your day off this week?
Wednesday and Friday, I think. And I think Monday's the only day I have off next week unless it changes, because Julie said it was going to change. So I don't know what's going to happen. But shut the door so the kids ain't loud. My mic picks it up.
It's almost ready, Jessica.
Good freaking Lord. I would like to get finished with this chapter. Ferdinand took a deep breath before exhaling. Karstad, what in the world has happened? Nothing as of yet, but there are some dangerous signs popping up. Ferdinand, everyone tensed up a little. Even if nothing had happened yet, the fact that there was danger would put anyone on guard. Karstad looked us over, then continued. I heard this from Elvira, but Ferdinand, as I've already mentioned to you, the former Veronica faction has shown signs of reviving as the Georgine faction ever since her visit. Yes, I remember you mentioning that, but she is the first wife of Ehrenbach. She doesn't have the ability to lead a faction into Ehrenfest. Or lead a faction in Ehrenfest. Veronica's faction had long been the largest faction due to her having served as the first wife of Ehrenfest during the previous Archduke's reign, then having raised the future Archduke ever since. Florencia was wedded to the duchy. It retained this prominence even when Sylvester becoming the Archduke caused Florencia and Navarre's faction to steadily grow in both size and power. That all changed, however, when Veronica was arrested for abusing her position as the Archduke's mother to commit crimes. The more neutral members within her faction instantly switched to Florencia's, and that is precisely why the former Veronica faction is attempting to recover. And that is precisely why the former Veronica faction is attempting to reconvene beneath Lord Wilfrid. Wilfrid, what does he have to do with a woman's faction? A woman's faction. The point is not for him to be invited to tea parties or anything like that. I imagine they just need a name to unite themselves under. Lord Wilfrid was raised by Lady Veronica, and he opposed the Archduke's will by inviting Georgine to return to Ehrenfest. Carson explained, reminding me of when we had said our farewells. He's the perfect figurehead to unify both the former Veronica faction and the new Georgine faction. But Wilfrid didn't intentionally disobey Sylvester, did he? I asked. He just wasn't paying enough attention to what was going on. Carson nodded. Right. I doubt he was thinking about anything at all, but what matters is how the situation looks to the public. Ferdinand began tapping a finger against his temple. This is going to be a pain, he muttered, his eyes narrowing as he fell deep into thought. I hadn't the faintest idea of what might have been running through his head. Karstedt continued speaking in the meantime, providing Ferdinand with more intel. It seems people are saying that with Lord Wilfrid close to Lady Georgine and very likely to become the next Archduke, there's no better leader for them. This information had come up in conversation during all manner of tea parties due to lay noble connections. Most neutrals were lay nobles since they needed to stick to the dominant faction just to survive, and thanks to that, information flowed freer through them than it did anywhere else. So despite all we have done to both unite the factions around Lady Florencia and Rosemine and restore Lady Florencia's right to rear Wilfrid as his mother, the war between factions is only getting worse. Ferdinand muttered, tightly knitting his brow. It seemed that all the hard work Elvira had been doing behind the scenes to form a large faction around the current first wife had now been washed away entirely. This was news to me, but she apparently hadn't been just been using the tea parties to gather information about Ferdinand and fangirl over him. They had made no open moves yet, at most having spread rumors and some information during the hunting tournament. They can't do much more when Lady Georgine is out of the duchy and Lord Wilfrid is under the supervision of his retainers. Normally this whole mess would just fade away over time, but since Lady Georgine is coming back next summer, it's impossible to squash it completely. We should stay on guard in case they become more active. Okay, Father, I have a question, I exclaimed, launching a hand into the air. What exactly does staying on guard entail? Karstedt, Ferdinand, Eckert, and Justice all replied in turn. Speak to Ferdinand before doing anything. Just think before you act. Do not speak to or meet with strangers. Don't accept bribes, even if they're books. The flurry of warnings hit me with such force that the most I could muster in response was a weak, okay. They really don't trust me at all, do they? Oh, considering they know that your love of books would spur you to do anything, considering you tried to join the temple just because they had a book room. Yeah, they kind of have a reason to, not trust you right now about this. With lunch over, they started a meeting to ensure that everything was in place for the Ruel gathering to proceed smoothly. We knew what to do this time since we had already experienced the Night of Caesarea last year. And with the Knight Commander Karstedt, Ferdinand, and Eckert all working together in an invincible team, it supposedly wouldn't be difficult at all. I hope. But hold on a second here. Something doesn't add up. I just started this book, and we're already getting the Ruel, whatever you want to call it. And I imagine that they're going to have to inform the Archduke about the Harvest Festival. They're going to have to brew her Jareve, and once she gets her Jareve, I know what happens during it. And that's how the next book starts, is after she has that potion and wakes up from it. Because it puts them to sleep while their body, heals. So, what happens in the entirety of the rest of this book? I'm only on page 65. I have over 300 pages left still. What's going to happen? The Fey Beasts are going to be gathered in a horde, but they're all weak, Karstedt began. We should use weapons that can kill swaths of them at once. During our previous attempt, they didn't appear until the Ruel petal started to fall, so it should be okay for us to delay our departure, Eckert suggested. I agree, Justice chimed in, and with that in mind, we should let Lady Rosemine nap for longer than she did last year. She was so sleepy last year that she needed to be kept awake during the battle. Wait just a second, Justice. That only happened because I had to contain the gulls for ages, I protested. As long as I only need to do the gathering part, I won't need any more sleep than last time. We all shared our opinions and narrowed down what role each of us was going to play. It was decided that the knights would position themselves in a circle around the Ruel tree, with Justice riding his high beast and slaying any fey beasts that tried climbing on the branches just like last year. You can fight even though you're a scholar, Justice? I know a bit about combat, since there's no avoiding it while gathering. At the very least, I'm skilled enough to protect myself. Considering that he gathered Ruels last year, it is perfectly safe to count on him in battle, Ferdinand said. It seems that Justice was completely unreliable when put in front of materials that he hadn't gathered before, but when it came to things he already had, and thus didn't care so much about, he'll join the fight without issue. By the time we had settled on when we would depart, discussed the type of fey beast we could expect to encounter, and established where we would each be positioned, it was already evening and time for me to nap. It seemed that Ferdinand had already worked me so hard in the morning that I could fall asleep with ease, but did that mean I was happy about it? Absolutely not. Curse him. Beneath the gleaming purple moon that marked the night of Shitsaria, we converged at the discussed time and flew to the same Ruel tree as the year prior. When we arrived, the moon was almost directly above us in the sky, and the Ruels were already swelling in size. The flowers bloomed as slender, metallic-looking tree branches wrapped around them, filling the air with a thick, flowery smell. The petals will soon begin to fall. Let us use this opportunity to slice away any obstacles, Ferdinand said. He whipped out his staff and murmured, Reichel, transforming it into a large, shining scythe that made him look entirely like a Grim Reaper. Ooh, that's scary. Especially if he's angry. Oh, that's very much more terrifying. The aesthetic honestly suited him pretty well, though I would never say that to him. Even if a similar concept did somehow exist in their culture, he would just end up getting mad at me. Yeah. Ferdinand lifted the scythe high into the air, then began slashing away the branches of the tree surrounding the Ruel tree. Yeah, get rid of the branches that any of the fey beasts can jump on like they did last year. I see, cutting the branches will decrease the number of fey beasts that can jump this high, Karstead muttered, transforming his own staff into a giant scythe and promptly hacking away at them as well. Upon hearing his words, I was struck with an intense urge to apologize to Ferdinand. I'm sorry for thinking that you look like the Grim Reaper. Ferdinand, you're the best. My hero. Incidentally, what did you use the Ruel flowers you gathered last year for, Justice? I asked. My hobby is gathering materials, not using them, so you will need to ask Lord Ferdinand about that, he replied. It seemed that he only needed a single ingredient for his collection, and once he had that, he gave the rest to Ferdinand. He considered it both an apology for all the problems he had caused in the past, and an advance payment for the future problems he was no doubt going to cause later. I couldn't help but wonder just how many issues Justice had been responsible for, but then it suddenly hit me. Wait a minute. Am I going to need to pay Ferdinand an apology fee too? But I can't think of anything he would want. Should I just pay him with my mana? Soon enough, the Ruel petals began to scatter. Just like last year, they peeled off one by one, dancing in the wind as they fell. They were large in size, a lot more similar to magnolias than cherry blossoms, and elegantly fluttered down like the white feathers of a bird, spinning and drifting along on the night breeze. The way they fused with the ground the instant they touched it made them all the more extraordinary and ephemeral. Rosemine, perform the blessing now before they arrive, Ferdinand called. Ugh. I prayed to Ungrif, the god of war, and blessed everybody as instructed, then flew right next to a Ruel, waiting for it to ripen so that I could gather it as soon as possible. Would you all shut up out there? From my elevated position, I curiously watched everyone below. Here they come. The 5 knights readied their weapons, now circling the Ruel tree. It was interesting to see how they all used different weapons. Eckert wielded a spear, Bridget the same halberd as last year, Daniel his familiar sword, and Karstedt the scythe he had been using to cut away the branches. Sadly, I couldn't see what Ferdinand was holding from where I was, but I could at least make out that it didn't seem to be a scythe. I wonder where it is. My pondering was soon interrupted by the rustling of grass and branches coming from far away. There weren't just 1 or 2 fey beasts approaching, there were dozens and dozens of them, and I knew from experience that countless more would soon follow, drawn in by the flowery smell. Cat-like zonts and squirrel-like aphids none tall enough to even reach Daniel's knees, and raced toward us, their eyes gleaming an intimidating red. Individually, they are weak. Take care to kill rather than wound them, Ferdinand ordered. This is going to be a long fight, Cardstead added. Watch your mana usage, Daniel. Yes, sir. Daniel, standing between Cardstead and Ferdinand, tightened his grip on his sword. Daniel's growth. As I wired in my high beast for the Ruel to finish growing, I watched everyone fighting below. The knights were stationed around the Ruel tree in a circle, with Daniel positioned between Ferdinand and Cardstead so that it could follow up on any Fey beast that slipped past him. He had the smallest area to protect out of anyone, but that much made sense. It was too risky to give him more than he could handle. Tiny Fey beasts rushed forward from all directions. After having traveled all around the duchy and having fought all sorts of Fey beasts while gathering my seasonal ingredients, I was better able to judge their relative strengths. With this knowledge, I could confidently say that the Zonce's Fets, which were slightly larger than Zonce's, and Effins raising toward us weren't much of a threat at all. Their strength came only from their numbers, and while this had proven dangerous last year, when we only had a few knights, we now had the mana-rich Ferdinand and Cardstead on our side. It seemed like this would be a piece of cake. Here I go. The first to strike was Eckert. He rushed a few steps forward, lowering his hips a little before thrusting his spear out with a tremendous force. A sharp whistling noise tore through the air, the weapon's tip gleaming beneath the purple moon. His blow had pierced the face stones of several Fey beasts, all of which melted away into nothingness. A single strike. That was all it took for him to kill multiple Fey beasts. Ha! Eckert pivoted, turning his twist into a wide swing that swept down all the Fey beasts nearby. Some were knocked to the ground by the blunt force of the shaft, while the others weakly collapsed after the spear tip sliced through them. Nearby Fey beasts moved to attack not Eckert, but those weakened Fey beasts, promptly devouring them. They were trying to eat the Fey stones to gain even a little bit of strength. His blue eyes fiercely fixed on the horde, Eckert stood next adjusted his grip on a spear, stabbing into the group over and over again. The rapid thrust sliced through the air, killing Fey beast after Fey beast. Wow, Eckert sure is cool. He's like half as cool as Dad is. Well, maybe more like a quarter as cool, or an eighth. That's... Considering how cool Gunter actually is, I think Eckert's way cooler. But that's just my opinion. Gunter's still awesome, but... kinda can't really compare. As I continued to watch Eckert fight, I let out a whistle of admiration. I had mostly just seen him helping Ferdinand with paperwork, but when he fought like a knight, he was honestly a sight to behold. While I was internally praising Eckert's heroic visage, I heard Bridget let out a ferocious battle cry. I adjusted the position of my high beast slightly to look at her. Ah! She roared again, stamping one foot down before swinging her halberd in a wide arc. It audibly cut through the air, then through the surrounding Fey beasts, all of which immediately began to melt. Next. Bridget's amethyst eyes locked onto her next targets without even pausing to watch the already slain Fey beast fully disappear. She lowered her hips into a battle stance, then spun and twisted to swing her halberd from side to side, her skirt flapping about as she moved. Her weapon followed her movements exactly, never lagging behind no matter how much she twisted her hips, and each time it flashed, its long, slightly curved blade swept through and tore apart several of the Fey beasts rushing their way. Bridget looked so alive since she ceaselessly swung her weapon, exuding beauty and heroic grace in equal parts. So wonderful. I want to be strong like that too one day. While I knew that I wouldn't ever be exactly like Bridget, I wanted to be all cool and knightly too. My dream was to be a wonderful older sister who everybody could count on. Incidentally, I wonder how Father fights. I had technically been there to see Cardstead fight during both the Spring Prayer raid and the Schneesturm hunt, but he had already been too far away. The former event had also ended after a single major attack, which was while there were so many knights present for the latter that I couldn't get much of a grasp on his particular fighting style. And so I scanned the area for where he was positioned, feeling a small wave of excitement wash over me. Soon enough, I spotted him. In my eyes, it looked like he was just lazily swinging around a scythe larger than his own body. It didn't even seem like he was putting that much strength behind his attacks. He was cutting down the horde of incoming Fey beasts with casual swipes, much like one would leisurely cut grass. Ah, Father, you're so strong. That's the Knight Commander for you. Even with how maybe she was talking about Cardstead, not Gunter. I don't know. Even with how nonchalant he seemed, each swing of his massive scythe resulted in a powerful slashing sound loud enough that I could hear it clearly from all the way up by the Ruel. It was like the very air was being torn apart, and the number of Fabies reduced to mist each attack was simply incomparable to Eckert's and Bridget's efforts. At least a dozen were killed with each swipe, if not more. It certainly wasn't my imagination that despite Karstedt having been given such a long area to protect, he had far fewer Fabies surround him than the others. He did come all the way from Ehrenfest just to help me with my gathering. Okay, Dad is still the coolest, but Father still gets to be second coolest. Oh, okay. Father is Karstedt and Dad is Gunter. Okay. I got myself confused here. I slapped my knees in excitement while praising Karstedt when the thunder of a loud explosion suddenly tore through the air. Yeep! It admittedly wasn't that loud, but it came so out of nowhere that I couldn't help but flinch and reflexively cover my ears. I swung my head around wildly, trying to find out what happened. Then I saw Ferdinand. A designated area for him to guard had a gaping circle in the middle completely clear of Fabies. There was no mistaking it. He was the one behind the explosion. But what could he have done to completely wipe out his surroundings? It was so unsettling that I couldn't take my eyes away from him, curiously watching to see what would happen next. Ferdinand simply stood there, watching casually as more Fabies scurried forward to fill the empty space. I couldn't help but wonder whether I was the one who got the sudden urge to yell, "Run, turn around and run if you want to live," at them. She's telling the babies to run away. Soon enough, Ferdinand tossed something at the approaching Fabies. It shone brightly in the air for a moment, then rapidly began to spread out. A second later, it seemed to have vanished completely. I couldn't see it anymore, at least. Was that a net? As it turned out, it hadn't actually vanished. After all, it had simply landed on all the Fabies. As they started to struggle and flail about in desperate attempts to escape, Ferdinand bent down and pressed a palm against the ground, carefully eyeing the trapped creatures. "Disappear," he said quietly. I could see him pouring mana into the net. Its strands alone shone with the light of mana, and an instant later I heard the same explosive boom as before. All the Fabies within the net disappeared just as Ferdinand commanded. That's terrifying. That is so terrifying. I could guess that only someone with an overwhelming mana capacity like Ferdinand could manage an attack like that. Pouring mana into a net that wide would require both a ton of mana and great skill in manipulating it. Ferdinand exhibited such overwhelming strength compared to everyone else that my unsettled awe turned into just plain fear. I decided to shift my gaze and focus on Daniel instead. His fighting style was a lot more drab than everyone else's in the sense there wasn't anything flashy about it. He simply thrust his sword into each Fabies one after another, but it was clear that he had grown since last year. He wasn't having to rely on his stamina and strength to preserve mana. He wasn't gasping for air, and he wasn't anxiously scanning his surroundings. Instead, he was facing straight forward, fighting without any hesitation. Having taken my advice seriously and incorporated it into his training, Daniel now knew how to vary the amount of mana he used in combat. He was using a little more when taking on the larger faces, and less when fighting the smaller ones. "Daniel, it's been some time. Take a step back and drink a potion." "There's no need, Lord Karstedt. I am doing just fine," Daniel said, shaking his head as he stabbed him at Azance with his sword. Maybe it was due to him being positioned between the two absolute powerhouses this year, but he was swinging with a lot more confidence and making sure to confirm each kill. "Push yourself." "I truly am fine," he replied quietly, not taking his eyes off the Fabies for even a moment as he continued to swing his sword. The battle continued for quite some time before Daniel eventually announced that he was falling back. This time, however, he was doing it on his own terms. Leaving the area he had been protecting the Karstedt and Ferdinand, he took a step back and leaned against the tree, downing a recovery potion. He would be resting until it took effect. "Damn, you're so much stronger now," I called down, leaning out the window of my panda bus. He looked up in surprise and gave me a small smile. "Thank you." A short while later, I noticed that he had closed his eyes. I could tell from his carefree breathing that he was checking how much mana he had. When he opened them again, his gaze was immediately fixed on the Fabies. He morphed his staff back into a sword, then leaped into battle once again. It seemed that his limits had increased enough to give him newfound confidence, and while he was fighting with much more leeway than before. He must have been taking his training really seriously. Well, no dip, dude, considering he's got a proposal counting on this. I knew how much Daniel had wished to grow stronger, so seeing his hard work bear fruit filled me with pride like I was watching my own son. His recent growth was a powerful reminder of just how significant a driving force love really was. Hello? You're well? As I was admiring how much Daniel had grown and grinning about his love life, Justice suddenly called out to me. "Milady, it's time. I believe you should start now pour your mana into the Ruel." After taking a deep breath, I leaned out of my panda bus and reached for the Ruel fruit, which looked a lot like a purple crystal. Dyeing it with my mana was no easy task. All living things had an instinct to reject outside mana as they violently resisted the process. I gripped the hard, smooth Ruel in my hands and started pouring my mana all at once, visualizing myself smashing its resistance to pieces. The fact that I could feel slightly less resistance than last year likely meant that I had grown a little myself too. I continued adding more and more mana, focusing my gaze on the Ruel as I steadily overcame its resistance. It wasn't long before it started turning from a translucent purple to a light yellow. Last year it had felt as though my mana was being pushed back, but there wasn't anything like that now. My mana flow was fast and uninterrupted. Justice, will this do? I asked, looking around just in time to see him cut down an infant on his way over. Once the threat was eliminated, he flew up to the Ruel, staying on guard. That was fast, Nat, milady, but yes, it's done. Upon removing it from the tree, please place it inside your bag at once. The Ruel had now completely changed color. I held it in my left hand as I cut the stem attaching it to the tree with my magic knife, then trimmed away all the excess parts before putting it in my bag. It was a bag that blocked the flow of mana, so I didn't think I needed to worry about Phoebe snatching it away anymore. She's finished her gathering, Justice called. Karset responded with a firm nod. Then we retreat. Not yet, I shouted back. Wait just a little longer. Damiel needs a Ruel too. Huh? Ferdinand blasted a crowd of Phoebes to bits, then shot me a fierce glare. What are you thinking, Rosemine? Doesn't he need a sizable face stone for his proposal next summer? He won't have any opportunity to gather one himself while he's guarding me, so he might as well grab it now. I learned all about this from the night stories, I said, proudly puffing out my chest. Both Ferdinand and Karstedt smirked at my remark, almost as if to say, look at this kid who can't even distinguish fiction from reality. I couldn't help but blink in surprise. Did I misread them or something? No, however, Ferdinand trailed off, then directed a meaningful glance at Bridget. I immediately understood you were obviously supposed to prepare the face stone stealthily, not in front of the very person you planned to propose to. Oh my god, you just blabbed out the secret! Oh my god! Rosemine! Girl, that was not a smart thing to do. You should have gone to Ferdinand before y'all left and then mentioned it to him and have Damiel do it. Golly! God, I thought I was being considerate of that, which is actually making things awkward for him. As I cradled my hand in sheer horror, a wide grin spread across Karstedt's face. Go get one, Damiel. You won't find face stones of a higher quality than these. They'll be perfect for your proposal, he said, continuing to cut down Phoebes all the while. Perhaps it was just my imagination, but I could have sworn I also heard him say, Elvira really is looking forward to seeing what happens next. Having the approval of the Knight Commander had sealed the deal, so both Eckert and Ferdinand told Damiel to hurry up and get it over with. I peered over at Bridget and saw that she was silently continuing to hunt Phoebes, intentionally not looking this way at all. It was a little hard to notice since it was dark as she was so far away, but it seemed that her ears had gone a little bit red. Sorry, Bridget, I didn't really mean to embarrass you like this. Damiel flew his high beast up to a Ruel, then chanted Messer to morph his stab into a knife. While I needed a high-quality face stone dyed complete with my own mana, Damiel needed a face stone meant for proposals. He wouldn't have to dye it with his own mana right at the tree like I did. He speedily chopped away some branches and grabbed two nearby Ruels, one for the proposal and one presumably for his own purposes. Then, with a pleased smile, he delicately placed them back into his own leather bag. This is my first time ever getting such a high-quality face stone, he said. I'll bring it home and take my time filling it with my mana. Upon returning to Dorvan's winter mansion, I slept as soundly as could be, filled with a mix of pride and satisfaction at having finally finished gathering all the materials I needed. When morning came, I practically skipped down the hall toward Ferdinand's room. He had told me to come and see him after eating breakfast, presumably to continue the paperwork we hadn't finished the day before. I was planning to put my all into it so we could start making the potion as soon as possible. I'm going to be healthy soon. I'll get strong and everything. I'm finally going to be a normal girl. Maybe. Don't get your hopes up, girl. Damiel had headed to Ferdinand's room ahead of time, so I was currently being accompanied by Fran and Bridget. I bounded along until we eventually arrived, at which point one of Ferdinand's attendants waiting outside opened the door to let us in. Good morning, Ferdinand. What do you need help with today? I asked, greeting him in a bright and lively tone. But the atmosphere in the room was so heavy and serious that I hurriedly shut my mouth. Nobody was working. That is to say, everyone but the attendants waiting by the door had been cleared out, leaving nobody to do the work. It was just Karstedt, Ferdinand, and Eckert, all regarding me with deep frowns, and Damiel, who met me with a pitiful stare like he was begging for help. Uh-oh, what happened? Damiel, what did you do? Bridget, Fran, leave. I fought back the urge to cling to Bridget and Fran as they sped out of the room, instead just blinking in utter bemusement. That gave Ferdinand ample opportunity to glare at me. I imagine you know why you're here, Rosemont. No, I do. Oh, no. Is he talking about the... Did they blab about the blessing? Oh, no. It's the compression method. That's gotta be what it is. Because Carson knows about the blessing. And so does Daniel. Ferdinand's the only one who doesn't know about that, but they don't know about the compression method. Oh, dear. What exactly did you do to Daniel? I honestly had no idea what he was talking about. Were they mad at me because I had treated Daniel wrongly as my guard knight? I desperately tried to recall everything that I had done recently. What did I do to Daniel? Do you mean when I suggested that he gather Ruels last night? Or when I gave him sweets while he was on guard duty the other day? Oh, but I gave those to Bridget too, so no, nothing like that at all. I'm referring that you were responsible for the unnaturally large increase in his mana capacity. Oh, the compression method. That is what it is. Okay. His mana capacity increased as a result of his own hard work. I did give him a little advice to help him out, but nothing would have happened without his rigorous training and dedication. Upon finding out that this was simply about Daniel's recent growth, I let out a sigh of relief that they weren't actually mad at me. But Karsten looked down at me with a stern expression. What in the world was that advice you gave him, Rosemont, he asked. His growth is outright abnormal. A lay noble like Daniel at the end of his growing period should not be displaying such a considerable increase. It's unprecedented. I just taught him my mana compression method with a visual example. In the same way that he used Gwenny pieces to help Angelica understand tactics, I said. Karsten and Eckert frowned in confusion. Ferdinand, however, regarded me with angrily raised eyebrows. Your mana compression method? I was not told of this. Huh? I mean, you never asked me about it, Ferdinand. It hasn't really come up in conversation. Also, I developed it myself, so I don't even know whether it's a good thing for people to do. Maybe it just happened to work well with Daniel, I said thoughtfully, but Daniel slowly shook his head. I believe anyone going through puberty would see an exceptional increase in their mana capacity by using your compression method. Lady Rosemont, I simply didn't report it because I did not want to return to being below average after finally getting some more mana. Forgive me. If everyone learned the same method and increased their mana capacities, then the average would rise with them, putting Daniel back at the bottom. I understand why you would want to hide it, Eckert said. It would make perfect sense to keep such a method a personal secret, or even have it passed down through one's family. It seemed that Daniel wasn't getting scolded for keeping that technique a secret, but then why were we even here? I guess they want to know the details? I turned to look at Ferdinand, who was watching me quietly with his light golden eyes. Rosemont, it seems that unlike Daniel, you did not intend to keep this a secret. Why then did you not think to spread this method throughout Ehrenfest, knowing that we are experiencing a mana shortage? Well, I mean, I didn't think about it. It was true that Ehrenfest was currently suffering from a shortage of mana, and that most people probably took great interest in finding ways to help increase the amount of mana available. But I wasn't most people. I was wholly focused on spreading books, so it never really occurred to me that I should try to spread my method. Compressing my mana is something that I constantly needed to do to survive while living on the brink of death. I didn't really consider it something worth teaching to nobles with magic tools, and it's possibly a dangerous method that might actually kill people. I didn't want to spread something like that dangerous. Karsten gave an understanding nod, but Ferdinand pressed a finger against his temple. Then why did you teach it to Daniel, he asked. Daniel knows of my origins, so he understood the true meaning and weight behind my saying it was something that I did while on the verge of death. Everyone else here also knew about my origins, and they all seemed to be wearing the same difficult frown. I see, Ferdinand eventually responded. I understand your perspective and why you did not feel motivated to make your technique more widely known. I will, however, ask you to spread it more nonetheless. I wish for this mana compression method to be taught to other nobles in Ehrenfest. The mana shortage is a problem that must be solved as soon as possible, and nothing could be better for us than increasing the mana capacity of the children who shall support Ehrenfest in the future. I could sense the slight urgency in his voice, but my understanding was that for the past 2 years, Ehrenfest had managed to meet its mana quotas and yield bountiful enough harvests thanks to me performing spring prayer. As much as I could understand him wanting to increase the mana capacities of the blue priests who helped to offer up mana, I didn't understand why he would so fervently want to increase the mana capacities of all nobles in general. It seems like you're in a hurry to do this, I observed. Is there a reason for that? Not particularly. It's just one more way to prepare for Georgine using her position as Ehrenbach's first wife to harm Ehrenfest. Raising the average mana capacity of any nobles could aid us considerably. If Ferdinand needed my help for some plan or another, then it would probably be wise for me to provide it, but my mana compression was hardly a reliable and safe process. I didn't want to just throw it out there in its current state. I don't mind spreading my method to help the duchy, I said, but I do have some conditions. Dang it. No. Okay, I'm going to keep going because I kind of got interrupted a couple times. Conditions for compressing mana. Eckert and Karstedt inhaled with surprise, but Ferdinand simply raised an interested eyebrow. Continue, he said. First, it must only be shown to those who have already learned the method taught in the Royal Academy, I explained. This is a life and death technique, so I have absolutely no intention of showing it to people who can't already compress mana on their own. Ferdinand, Eckert, and Karstedt all nodded along slowly as if my first condition was only natural. Damiel alone stood there awkwardly, clearly more concerned about whether or not he would be punished than what we were talking about now. Second, my technique may be taught only to those in the same faction as me. I have no intention of helping my opposition get more mana. It was purely because of my mana capacity that I had been accommodated as an apprentice blue shrine maiden, and then adopted as the Archduke's daughter despite being a commoner. I wanted to preserve my superiority in that regard at least a little, even if I knew that it wouldn't be safe to aid my enemies like this. Restricting my technique so that only those in the Florencia faction increase their mana capacities would help to destabilize the Georgine faction, would it not? I continued. And with Sylvester set on Wilfrid becoming the next Archduke, this should be a good way of showing that he's firmly on our side. Georgine's supporters were desperate to absorb Wilfrid into their faction, but having both him and the Archduke deny these ties, as well as making it clear that Wilfrid was a member of the Florencia faction, would cause any rumors about such an alliance to die out over time. The only reason such heresy exists in the first place was because there was a lot of uncertainty in politics, and Wilfrid wasn't yet properly educated. So all we needed to do was tie him to his parents more. Would that not give you full control over the selection process? Ferdinand asked. I cannot say I would feel safe leaving such an important matter to your discretion. I would rather do Ferdinand feeling that out. I'm still not all that familiar with noble politics myself, so I feel the same way. I hardly knew anything about which nobles had connections to which. It already took everything that I had to memorize the names of all the nobles related to my own family, and to put together a blacklist based on Besenwant's letter. But neither group was necessarily set in stone, and the value of what was at stake would surely cause people to become desperate. So I didn't want to be in a position where it was solely my call whether or not any given noble was trustworthy. Instead, I continued, I proposed that nobles should need the approval of 6 different people, the archducal couple, as they hold the highest authority in Ehrenfest, you, Ferdinand, since you can use your wealth of knowledge to make rational decisions, not influenced by emotions, father, because he is the pillar of our military as knight commander, mother, as she is the de facto leader of the Florencia faction, and lastly me, since I'm the one providing the mana compression method. So, Sylvester and Florencia, Ferdinand, Karstedt, Elvira, and mine. Okay. The list were quite simply my guardians. If someone had all their approvals, then it was hard to imagine they would turn out to be one of my enemies. That was about as much insurance as I could ask for. Oh? That is quite a number of people. Is the archducal couple not enough for you? Ferdinand asked with a slight amused grin. I personally think Sylvester would prioritize his feelings as a father, freely giving away the information no matter what faction gets involved with Wilfrid. I similarly believe that Florencia's motherly affection would allow her heart to be swayed. Karstedt gave a deep frown. Rosemine, are you saying that you don't trust the archducal couple? I do trust them, but they are parents. I feel as though they will put their children above all else, just as Mom and Dad did for me. Perhaps due to having met my lower city parents before, Ferdinand seemed to instantly understand what I meant. A complex expression rose on his face, a mixture of reminiscence and bitterness. So you base your expectations of parental emotions on them, he said. You will find that such a perspective does not hold water in noble society. Everyone has their own thoughts on parenthood, so I don't really care whether or not it holds water. My personal opinions were rooted in my experience with my Earth mother, who had given me all the books I could ever want, and my common parents who stood up even to nobles to protect their children. Furthermore, I added, no matter how thorough we are, our selection process won't matter if the method leaks to other duchies. Will it? I was thinking of using a magic contract to prevent the people we teach from then passing it on to others. But do there exist magic contracts of a large enough scale to cover not just Ehrenfest, but the entire country? Such contracts do exist, though they are enormously expensive, Ferdinand replied. This was the man who referred to large gold as small change, so just how much could they be? I was honestly afraid to ask, but without a contract like that, there was no way for us to exclusively boost Ehrenfest's mana level. Money or mana, pick one. I intend for this method to be known only in Ehrenfest, and if you aren't willing to pay for magic contracts to ensure that, then consider this discussion over. The contracts can be arranged, Ferdinand replied carefully, wearing the same frown that he always wore when contemplating matters of money. It will certainly be worth using a portion of Ehrenfest's budget. Ferdinand, could you make it such that not even married couples or siblings could teach the method to one another? Naturally, since there would be an individual contracts for each noble, but why? I mainly don't want this knowledge spreading haphazardly. Mana compression is so dangerous that several professors are present while it's being taught, even in the Royal Academy. And accidents occur no matter how thorough the preparations are. Aren't you the one who mentioned this to me? I hadn't forgotten when Ferdinand asked how I was still alive, or when he mentioned that it was exceedingly rare for children to successfully learn their own style of mana compression. I didn't want something that dangerous to end up spreading like wildfire. This mana compression method is so effective that it allowed me to go from being an apprentice blue shrine maid in the temple to the Archduke's adopted daughter. I can imagine parents desperately forcing it onto their mana-sparse children, in a last-ditch effort to avoid them being sent to the temple, which I certainly wouldn't want to happen. In noble society, children with less mana than was desired for their house's status were sent to the temple or given up to be adopted by other houses of lower status. There was a chance that parents wanting to avoid this fate might force my mana compression method on their children, which could result in a massive surge of pre-baptism deaths. Pre-baptism children are not considered to be people, Ferdinand responded. That's just from a political standpoint, though. Regardless of whether or not they're considered people by the duchy, they're still alive. And under no circumstances do I want real, living children to be put at risk like that. That is something that I simply will not tolerate, and I wholeheartedly refuse to concede on the matter. As I made my position clear, Ferdinand tightly knitted his brow and lowered his gaze. When he looked up again, there was a piercing sharpness in his light golden eyes that would permit neither weakness nor deception. Would your opinion remain unchanged, even if some children who could have become nobles were instead sent to the temple, he asked, his voice lower than normal. I would much rather the 11 blue priests we have now than 10 dead children and 1 noble, I said, meeting his gaze head on. There was an enormous difference between joining the temple and living as a noble, but even knowing that, I couldn't budge. I see. His eyes softened, then he placed his thoughtful hand on his chin. As usual, I cannot understand why you would be so adamant about something that brings you absolutely no personal gain. But very well, I shall honor your wishes. Your mana compression methods shall be taught only to those who meet your conditions, and they shall sign contracts that prevent them from sharing this technique among even their family members. Any other conditions? I will charge a teaching fee as well. That much is reasonable considering how valuable the information is, yes? I did consider that myself, but would it not prevent lay nobles from participating? Ferdinand asked, tapping his temple and muttering some speculation about the optimal price. I could see Daniel pale out of the corner of my eye. If your goal is to evenly spread the increase of mana, I said, why not charge lay nobles less, raising the price more for each rank above that? Archnobles are born with enough mana that they can suffice without the method, so only those who feel there is value to the knowledge will need to buy it. The color returned to Daniel's face, but now it was Karstead who had gone pale. He began counting on his fingers and started cradling his head. Perhaps I would need to implement a family discount. I shall accept your conditions. Now, Rosemine, what is the principle behind your mana compression? Ferdinand asked, a grin arising on his face. But I merely smiled back at him and shook my head. That can wait until you've signed your magic contract and paid your fee, Ferdinand. I see you've learned to be cautious. Anyone would guess that you're plotting something when you look at them with that villainous smirk of yours. Ferdinand scoffed, then turned to look at Daniel, silently asking me what should we do with him. I directed my attention toward Daniel. In turn, he looked like a criminal on trial and waiting his sentence. I taught you of my own volition, so I will ask for no fee, I began. But...
Here's your shirt.
Thank you. I will have you sign a magic contract stating that you will not pass what you've learned on to anyone else, just like the others. Is that acceptable? Of course, Daniel said, the smile on his face making it exceedingly clear that he was mostly just pleased about not needing to pay any money. Karstead sighed in relief. With Ferdinand speaking to you so casually, it seems that I have nothing to worry about. and with our discussion about mana compression over, he began his return to Ehrenfest by Highbeast. Just how brutal does noble society have to be for my talks with Ferdinand to seem casual? Or is Ferdinand the brutal one here? Honestly, I don't even want to think about it. We take some time to rest after having seen Karlstadt off, with plans to leave for Ilgner the next day. We had at least this much leeway since the province was relatively close to Dorvan. Rosemine, as I'm going to be accompanying you to Ilgner, my own tax official will suffice. Justice shall be returning to Ehrenfest ahead of us. Do you have any issues with this? Ferdinand asked. Not at all. I could guess that Justice had been told to investigate the unsettling air around the Georgine faction. Karlstadt had mentioned, plus he was probably wanted to start preparing for the mana compression stuff. Justice was one of Ferdinand's loyal retainers anyway, and not sending him to work at a time like this would be a waste of his talents. Excellent. I have much to do today, and it would be an inconvenience to have you wandering about the Winter Mansion causing problems. So I ask that you take this and spend the rest of the day reading in your room. Understood. I won't leave my room at all. Yippee! A whole day of reading. Hugging the bundle of papers that Ferdinand had given to me to my chest, I giddily returned to my room. When I arrived, Fran pulled back a chair for me, which I eagerly hopped onto. The papers were a dossier on the Georgine faction containing the names of noble wives who attended tea parties hosted by its members, a description of the almost neutral lay nobles who were friendly with them. As I leafed through it, I saw the entire family trees of the noble wives had been written out, and the last page concluded with the following lines. I hope this proves useful to you, Lord Ferdinand. Say hello to Rosemine for me. Mother. Elvira had evidently written out this dossier and gotten Karlstadt to deliver it, warning us about the upcoming danger to help us avoid whatever might happen. I could feel the love of a mother in those pages, and tears started to well up in my eyes. I need to go over these and memorize all the names. And so I gave the dossier a very thorough read-through. As expected, many of the people on my blacklist for being friendly with Besenmoths were listed here, so I knew more than half the names already. Trying to keep track of the complex family trees, however, was enough to make my head spin. Okay. I think I'll end this off here, and I'll see everybody in the next one.